The Princess and the Goblin by George MacDonald. Book review. So I came across this book while just browsing through the library, and I'd never heard of it before, but it was in the classics section of the library, and I thought, classic. I've never heard of this before. But I picked it up, and it was published in 1872. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely old enough to be a classic. What also got me interested was this was obviously an example of fantasy books before the modern fantasy genre. It's something I've been curious about lately. My understanding is that kind of modern fantasy publishing as we know it today was largely created by Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and that kind of before then there was, there were fairy tales, but there was no kind of fantasy genre like published for adults or for adult readers. I was curious what a story from 1872 would be like, fantasy story, kind of before Tolkien. On the whole, it's a very easy read, but it's very different from today's children's books, and it is a children's book. It is written in that dry Victorian-era style that often makes you wonder, wow, did children really read this stuff back then? It's much the same as when you're reading Treasure Island or Alice in Wonderland, or, the type Victorian-era books. It's 241 pages long, but there's not really much of a plot to speak of. Basically, the goblins try to kidnap the princess, and the princess, together with a local miner boy and her fairy grandmother, outwit the goblins. The narrative is filled with half-starts, dead ends, and pointless descriptions and excursions, all of which make me suspect the author was trying to stretch this story out just so that it could graduate from a simple fairy tale to something of the length of a novel. As in all fairy tales, the characters don't act like real people, but they're rather slaves of the plot. That is, to the extent that there is a plot. The characters do foolish things to get themselves in danger, and then are capable of extraordinary cunning to get themselves out of danger. The author makes attempts to justify these changes in mindset after the fact, or these actions after the fact. But I just got the image of the characters being puppets to the plot, rather than of being kind of full, living, breathing people. Interesting, I'm going to make an addendum to this. Since I originally kind of wrote this review originally, I got feedback from a friend of mine who told me that George MacDonald was actually kind of a very famous theologian and philosopher, and apparently quite influential in English literature. He's one of the pioneers of the fantasy genre, so not only this book, but a couple other of his books, which names I forget, but it's all in Wikipedia. Big influence on Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, even though he was kind of one generation before them. So, I may have been too harsh on this book. I don't remember, but this was definitely the impression I had initially after reading it the first time.